Now we just planted yesterday on May 26th 14 acres of buckwheat out here on the property, and those are ultimately for our food plots, but they're not for the timing of planting food and when food helps you. And I think you know, you see all the farmers out here, all the farmers right now, they're cutting hay and they're getting corn in. We have our first corn germinating around in the last year, and so you have all this planting going on. A lot of the spring alfalfa plantings with cover crops, those are going in around here. So as food plotters, we look at it like, hey, you know, spring's planting time, right? Well, it is. I mean, we plant rye in the early spring for building the soil. We plant buckwheat for building the soil, and a way to plant our big seeds and all seeds into, a way to manage our soil, break apart our soil, avoid compaction, put fine organic matter in, control weeds, stop erosion, maintain soil moisture. That's why we're putting buckwheat in during the summertime, but we are not planting it for deer food. And when it comes to feeding deer, summertime is one of the worst times that you could be planting specifically to attract deer, hold deer, and have deer eat on your land. And there's one exception to that, and that's those areas where you need to build a deer population. So what I've always said is, when you want to build the deer population, you do that by attracting does, fawns, and trying to attract them year-round as much as you can. But you build during the summertime. You get that fawn crop born here, does hanging out here during the summertime. And so I went it that way, starting in the UP of Michigan. Even under QDM and QDM principles, even through the QDMA, they even published articles in the QDMA about building a deer population when the deer density was too low. And that still can be QDM principles, QDMA supported principles, now the NDA, because not every area has the correct number of deer per square mile in carrying capacity. And so that was the approach I took, is I used a lot of summer food. In fact, I had 8 acres out of 8 acres of food plots at one time planted in clover, because the clover would help build that doe family group. And then when you get to areas like this, when you're in ag-rich areas and you don't have a problem with deer numbers, then you find that summer food does the exact same thing. It builds deer population. And when you have too many does on your property, it's a really bad thing. It hurts your deer management goals and it hurts your hunting goals. So planting food that relates to that at this time of year, beans, clover, alfalfa, whatever it might be, can be a very bad thing, because it can exacerbate deer numbers. And when that happens and you expand those deer numbers, then that carry over into the fall. Does that are here today are here to stay. So when that happens, those deer come in, and those does and fawns, they have does and fawns here. You establish that this is fawning grounds, and that the deer get used to that. And those fawning grounds are not even traditional, but the territorial. Does fight for those fawning grounds, and if a doe lives 12 years, they'll just keep dumping fawns on your property, and those females, those doe fawns, are going to stay here. And then a lot of times, if that mom's around, those button bucks leave. So that creates an entire culture where you're putting too many deer on your property. That doe factory is real, and I've seen it from both sides. Dylan, we get to see that on client properties all the time, where we go and they're like, what do we do about all our does? Well, quit planting the summer food.
Or they'll be, you know, bragging up their summer food, and you're like, I bet you got a lot of does, don't you? And they're like, yeah, we have all our bucks are nighttime. And
that's why your bucks during the fall are nighttime. That's why they don't live that time of year. And so that's point one. It can be really bad. On the flip side, if you want to build numbers, you need to plant summer food. If you want to get rid of deer numbers, the first step is not trigger control. It's not in any way. The first step is getting rid of summer food, because that's usually the problem. And I'll see people that we just can't shoot enough. They might be shooting 20 deer a year. Well, when you have 20 acres of soybeans growing all summer long, well, no wonder you just create a vacuum where it just keeps sucking in other deer from other properties, because you have all this summer food. They change their fawning grounds to your grounds because you have the best food in the area for summertime. And those does that are here today are here to stay. So they have does and fawns. You just magnify the problem. On the flip side, again, if you want to increase numbers, then by all means plant summer food. And that's why, like in the UP of Michigan, when I was there back in '99 and going forward, establishing that rotation where I'd take half my plots out, plant those in a cool season annual with a perennial base, so that the cool season annual would attract deer and hold for hunting season, and then that would transfer into a perennial the following year. And I'd rotate those half the plots every year, so that I always had that attractiveness during the summer and then that crop during the fall for deer. But what I found was, because those does and fawns were hanging around during the summer, that food would pop in the fall, that I needed to last into December as much as I could. And those does would attack like an army and get rid of that summer food. It was a really bad thing. So, number 2, one of the bad things about planting food right now in the summer for deer, for attracting deer, is that it's at the completely wrong timing for when the deer need it and when you need it. You help deer during the fall and winter, and you hunt deer during the fall and early winter. So there's a big difference from having a lot of deer on your property in the summer as opposed to the fall. And a lot of times when you have small properties, typically a 40-acre parcel might have 3 or 4 acres of food. Well, you don't have enough to provide food for the entire year if you have moderate deer numbers. You just don't have enough space, and plus having the deer during the summertime creates magnification of overbrowsing going into the fall, because they're here today, they're here to stay. So that little green pops up, they just wipe it out. So when you're building a herd, you build a herd during the fall. So late summer into fall, you hold those deer. So if your food plot is really kicking, if your food plot program is kicking during the fall, it's not that you don't want does at all. There has to be a certain number of does, because if your property is not attractive enough for does in September, October, November, then why would bucks be there? So you're always going to have does, but the bucks by number will be greater if you moderate your doe numbers. So there's a certain number of does that equals a certain number of bucks. You increase that number of does, the number of bucks on your land, because of space, food, habitat availability, shrinks. So the more does you have, past a certain balance point, the fewer bucks you have. So that's one thing. If you have fewer bucks, how can you protect them? You're not doing any good if the bucks are coming in. Building a herd, bucks are the lowest hole in the bucket. So you're not doing a great thing if you have 40 does on your 100 acres and 10 bucks or 20 bucks. You should have about double on really good properties that we manage. You see double the number of bucks during the fall, overall unique individual bucks, than does. And I'm not talking every day, every week. I'm just saying if you looked at every antlered buck, counted them up, you're going to have double the number of does and fawns on your property. But if you're not at least at equal, you're doing a really bad job, because the bucks are reflective of a home range over a very large area, 3 square miles. Does are reflective of a home range about 1/5 that, 1/6 that, a very small percentage of that overall buck range. So that's why when you see an unfair number of bucks on your property, you're doing something right. And when you have that summer food, you're usually doing something wrong. And the timing, when you can build a herd, and of course when you can hunt. I mean, all of this usually goes along with, if you're building a herd, then you're hunting. You can't have a great herd without a great hunt, because they go hand in hand, meaning in the fall. And if you have enough food and habitat, then carry over in the winter. And the third and final point I'll bring up is the annual whitetail shift. I started writing about this a long time ago, wrote about this in my books. It's really important to consider that bucks typically on average, and it could be a lot greater in wilderness areas, ag areas, we find it's about 1.5 miles. Bucks will live during the summer about 1.5 miles from where they typically live in the fall. Not all the time. You can have the exception where you'll have a small postage stamp property in a coverless big ag region like northern Ohio. It's 30 acres of cover. It's the most cover within 3 miles in any direction. Well, you might have mature bucks that live there year round because they have no other choice. They don't want to sandwich in with each other. Around here where it's less than 50% ag, maybe 40% ag, and there's a lot of hills and cover, then what you find is those mature bucks want to live somewhere where they're not being bothered as much. And typically that means that they're living in areas that are ag rich, no does and fawns, and then they're not there because they don't have that ag rich food to support them. And that cover that they want, that open canopy and shade, they don't want to bust through. You see this thick gray dogwood over here, and briars, honeysuckle, they don't want to bust through that during the summertime. They can't with their antlers and velvet. So they're in open, mature, open woods next to soybeans, alfalfa fields, and then they shift about 1.5 miles. And so, like Dylan tells a lot of clients, we were just discussing this today, where he'll tell people, Summer food is bad in general unless you're building a herd, but you want your food starting to peak in late August, September, and into October, because that's when those bucks are shifting. So now they come over here. Not only do you not have an army of does and fawns there, but you have great food, great fall and winter habitat, which is different than a buck summer habitat, and it's very inviting to them. Think about that. Numbers of deer, when the deer need it the most, your most volume of food plots, when you can protect bucks, advance them to the next age class, have a great hunt. It all goes together, and it's not right now for planting food. A lot of people I see on, I'm gonna try alfalfa this year. Why? Alfalfa gets frosted out and it dies. They're not hitting alfalfa out here in all these ag fields. They're passing through it during night. I mean, it's nighttime grazing, but it's not their high quality food around here. Same with clover. We have clover pass-through plots that go to our big fields. This is one of our big fields. We don't have any clover out here. This is one of our rotation fields right here. We just planted in buckwheat. Half of this will be our rut zone. The rut zone we plant around July 1st. It's after fawn drop. It's after does have established where they're going to be during the summertime in their summer residence, where their summer fawning takes place. And so we're planting that rut zone. It has a bean component, about 40 pounds, 42 pounds per acre. Has peas, buckwheat for an early season crop, tillage radish for middle season. Really targeting November and December with that crop. Our corn was just not cutting it in any way. So we have that. We'll plant around July 1st. And then the other half of this plot, that'll actually be on the front half this year, down past into this a little bit. That'll be planted and drilled in this front half. And then that back half will be 1/4 of this field. So half of that back half back there will be in brassica and our big boost brassica, and half will be fall power greens. And so that's the mix that we'll have out here. We got rid of the corn this year. And you can see all the switchgrass we have up here for screening on this end. We don't even need to plant any screening this year on any of our properties because our switchgrass is doing so good up in that upper half. Be solid wall of switchgrass you won't even be able to see out there. You won't even be able to see the side-by-side with the switchgrass there. So these are all tucked in here, and that's the timing we do for our plots, and that's why we expect to shoot 80% of the mature bucks in the area, the entire area within a mile in any direction, every single year, because we follow these guidelines that I'm talking about. This isn't made up stuff, and that's why we try to help clients with this. And even then they'll fall victim to the latest magic bean or whatever, and they just got to plant it and try it. But if you want practices that work, help you develop a great herd, gives you habitat improvements with a purpose, and oh, by the way, gives you a great hunt, then follow this advice. I highly recommend it.